Our next panel, From Protest to Revolution, Women, Life, Freedom, 2 years on, will examine the evolution of the movement and evaluate its current status, highlighting the resilience of Iranian women and the broader struggle against the Islamic Republic. Joining us for this panel are Parmida Barez, an author, songwriter, and activist, Gazelle Sharmahd, a German-American activist, and Marjan Keypour, founder and director of Alliance for Rights of All Minorities. The panel will be moderated by Nina Khoshkish, Nufti's communications associate. Please join me in welcoming our speakers.
Thank you all for sticking around for such an important panel. You know, in the last 10 days, we saw the second anniversary of Mahsa, of Nika, of Hadith, and since then, hundreds of people have been murdered, tens of thousands have been arrested and tortured by the Islamic Republic. This panel is more relevant now than ever, and some people seem to think that this revolution started and ended in 2022, but 2 years on, and the people of Iran are still fighting for freedom, whether it be through social media or through strikes. This revolution is far from over. So I want to start off with your personal experiences in this movement, so we can just go down the aisle. What does woman, life, freedom mean to you, and aside from the obvious, of course, and what roles have you taken on during this revolution?
Well, I just want to say hello to everyone here today. Thanks for sticking around for the last panel. As an Iranian woman, born in Iran and raised in the diaspora, this is a deeply personal mission for me. When it comes to thinking about what roles have I played, anything and everything that's required. I think in the fight for justice, no role is too small or too big. It's about rolling up your sleeves, you know, all hands on deck. So what that's kind of looked like for me has been helping in the background with prisoner databases, as well as liaising with members of parliament to help push for policy changes. The 2 spoken word poems that I have released were actually garnered quite a bit of traction online, which was a great gateway for us to be able to speak on major news networks and share our experiences in that way to, you know, expose the regime's corruption. But my why behind it, it really is a vision for a better future, a better tomorrow where girls don't have to go to school and worried about getting poisoned, where doctors, lawyers, nurses, they're celebrated, not thrown in prison, where Iranian youth can see and build a future in their own country and not have to flee and seek refuge abroad, where artists can create freely without fear of persecution. I see my privilege. In Iran right now, there's a woman who looks just like me, who's beaten or killed for showing a few strands of her hair. There's a woman just like me who's prohibited from entering sports stadiums and singing in public. And in the court of law, her testimony is worth half of a man's. These are things that I always recognize as a member of the diaspora. And you know, that vision expands beyond Iran's borders. It's a vision for a safer world for all of us. A world that's free of the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism. A world that's free from a regime that indoctrinates and funds and trains proxies and exports terrorism wherever it goes. See, more than ever, the world needs our leadership. It's our fight, and I'm all in.
Is this on? Oh, yeah. Let me first start off with my role in this. I mean, like, my father was kidnapped, Jamshid Sharmahd, 4 years ago, taken to Iran by the terrorist regime. So before that, he was an activist like most of the people in this room here for 16 years. What I've been trying to do since then is put my little feet into the big footstep that he has left behind. What my dad did and what many of the people here, my co-panelists, do is education. So we want to talk about the backgrounds of the Women, Life, Freedom Revolution. It is important to know that this is not just some spontaneous uprising that just happened because of one woman, which is the symbol of the Women, Life, Freedom Revolution. But first of all, this is one uprising in a series of uprising for the last 45 years. We saw it on Nufti's video, the many times the Iranian people have been up and down in waves of like recovery and rising up again. So this is a continuation of that. But more importantly, and that is something that most of the world is ignoring, but it is so important, the Women, Life, Freedom Revolution and these uprisings did not start in 1979. Iran has been under siege for 1,400 years. This is a continuation of a struggle that came with the Arab invasion in 635, that came to the entire Middle East and took over nations, states, peoples, empires, and are still being there. How do we know that? The leaders of the current regime assert that they are direct descendants of the Arab forces of the jihadists that came back and took over our nations, took over everything that we had. 1,400 years ago, they say, I'm the son of the son of the son of the son, going back there. So what they're asserting, pretty much, is that they're not native to our land. They're not native to our culture. And we see that in our history. We had dynasties like the Samanid dynasties that fought back. We had the Pahlavi dynasty that fought back. But every time we fought back, they fought us again and tried to oppress us. In 1979, there was no revolution. There was a coup, an Marxist coup that took over our country and gave it to these oppressors, foreign oppressors. And when we say foreign, we really mean foreign, because they replaced everything Iranian that we had. They replaced our Iranian government with an Islamic regime. They replaced our Iranian ministries with terrorist hubs. They replaced our Iranian courts with revolutionary Islamic courts. They replaced our language with Arab scholars. They replaced our flag with an Islamic symbol and Arabic writing on it. They replaced our anthem, our culture, our everything, our identity with something foreign that is not Iranian. So when the people of Iran are saying, this regime is not Iran, stop calling them Iranian, we really mean that, because they're not. They're a foreign jihadist occupier in our country. And this is very important for us to know, and everything that I just explained, copy-paste that for the other nations in the Middle East. These foreign invaders did the same thing to the Lebanese people. They replaced them and took it over. They replaced the Syrians, the Iraqis, the Egyptians, the Yemenis. All over the Middle East is a big occupation. So the people outside our campuses right now who are so anti-occupation, they have to understand the Arab Spring, the formation of the State of Israel, and the Women, Life, Freedom Revolution are the ultimate movements that are anti-occupation and for the native people and for liberation. So stand with us. That's it.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back on this stage and among so many friends. I could build so much on what Gazelle said about removing of our Iranian identity, but I'll get back to that. Let me just answer the question about what we have done, what I have done to promote the message of women, life, freedom, what it's meant to me. Those of you that I've had a pleasure of knowing know that I started this activism work about 10 years ago, right here in Washington, D.C., when there was a possibility of détente with the promise of reform upon the election of Hassan Rouhani during the Obama administration. And at that time, I knew that there was no such thing as reform. I was not really involved in a lot of Iran analysis world, but I knew enough to know that there's no difference between conservative and reformist, and that everything was just under one supreme leadership. So I took it upon myself as a member of a minority group that has experienced discrimination in Iran, and as a woman who had to abide by different rules than the mainstream, than a Muslim man would. I thought that maybe I could lean into that weakness of being a minority in order to tell a story of an alternative reality that Iranian people are living with. And with that, I started to work on amplifying the voices of Iranian minorities and advocating for equal rights for Iranian women. So I got to know this experience and mission of women, life, freedom. I got to really experience it as a student. But over the past 10 years, I was just trying to engage people in conversations about it. I was trying to get an audience for people to hear about the plight of the Iranian women and minorities. I was trying to tell the story, but there was no one who wanted to hear it. They did not want to hear anything that was counter to the mainstream narratives of reform being blossoming in Iran at the time. And any alternative stories, even though they were coming directly from the Iranian people, were shut down and it was perceived as radical. So, but what happened was because Mahsa and then Nika and others made such incredible sacrifices and lost so much of their innocence, and the country woke up really to this immense energy and spark that really cast a bright light into the entire country. There was some level of opening, and people for the first time wanted to hear what the Iranian people had actually to say, and they realized for the first time that the experiences and the stories were different than the stories of the government and the stories that were being repeated in the echo chambers over and over. So when I saw that there was this opportunity, that suddenly there's an audience that is interested and compassionate and willing to hear, I tried to tell as many stories as possible. But then I was also immensely happy to see that there were so many new activists who were coming to the surface, people who had not previously really engaged in these issues, but they were suddenly motivated, and they had it had struck a nerve with their Iranian identity, Iranian heritage. Even if they didn't speak any Persian at all, they wanted to defend their Iranian heritage, and they came to the surface. And I did everything I could to support them, to mentor them, to help them, make introductions, to introduce them to other people in order to help and amplify as many voices as possible. And I think the journey continues, and it's just the same way that the movement continues inside Iran. And yes, there is some level of movement fatigue, perhaps, some level of disappointment, some level of heartbreak. But when we feel this way, we need to pay attention to what's going on inside Iran, what those nurses who are striking are going through. We need to get our energy from them, because they are striking, they are protesting with empty stomachs and empty hands. But we have so much more to give, including this very microphone. So we have to continue.
Thank you, Marjan. I actually want to direct this first question at you. What do you think the essence of the woman life freedom is? Like in 2022, Iran ranked 143rd out of 146 countries on the Global Gender Gap Report by the World Economic Forum. This movement touches on the issue of gender inequality. It touches on ethnic and religious minorities in Iran. It touches on human rights, political freedom. But is there fundamentally more to what the people of Iran are asking for?
So for so long, I tried to tell the stories of Iranian women and Iranian minorities in the language and context that American people would understand. Mainly the American left, using the language of equality, bringing up horrible experiences of repression that they were dealing with. The fact that women cannot make decisions about their reproductive choices. The fact that women cannot initiate marriage, divorce. The fact that women cannot necessarily reject the marriage that the parents want her to get involved in. The fact that children as young as 9 are forced into child marriage without any ability to say no or to reject those decisions that are made for them. The fact that women and girls do not necessarily have access to equal access to education, and sometimes they're rigidly prevented from accessing one. All of these stories, the fact that minorities, Iranian minorities, sometimes cannot get something as simple as an identification card. And when you don't have an ID card, you cannot be counted. When you're not counted in a desolate region, you're not going to get resources. The government is not going to provide support and resources and water and electricity and all the basic infrastructural needs that they need in order to survive and thrive. But what happened with the Mahsa movement was that all of these pains, all of these vulnerabilities, all of these sufferings suddenly became the suffering and stories of all of the Iranians. They did not need to separate themselves to advocate for their individual separate causes, because they saw that they were all suffering from the same problem, all perpetrated by the same source, a repressive government that is depriving all of them from rights and from the dignity that they so deserved. So the story is different. And what happened as a result of this spark of the Women Life Freedom movement was that Iranians made three major realizations. And I refer to this slide because, not only because it's in my eyes right now, but because it really matters. One was that all the facade of reform versus conservative was all removed. And they realized that there is no difference between this leader and that leader. And they saw that no matter who they vote for, the state of their lives will remain the same, because the supreme leader is the sole decision maker who has control over every aspect of their lives, from the way they want to dress, men too, by the way, to the way that they want to pursue, the music they want to listen to, and so on and so forth. So they made that realization. Second was that the neighbors, they realized that their neighbors are not their enemies. Even though the regime had tried to divide the society and conquer by putting one group against another group, by alienating one group as pseudo-terrorists, as separatists, as this and that, they realized that they're all in this together, and that they moved from being aliens to allies to one another. It was a fundamental shift. The neighbors were not their enemies, and they shifted from aliens to allies, and they decided to work together. And that collaboration is still valuable, even though the regime is still trying to divide and conquer. And then lastly, it was the realization, broader realization among broader aspects of the society, that their enemy is not outside in the United States or Israel, that the enemy is right here. And the way they proved that they do not want to support this enemy that is repressing them, that regime that is only there to use the resources and abuse them and make their lives miserable, was by the way that they did not participate in the elections. And the mass boycott of this election was phenomenal. It was historic, to the point that Khamenei had to beg the society to go and participate in the elections. And that was a huge win.
I want to circle back to something that you mentioned about revolution fatigue, and I also want to circle back to what you said about how there are girls in Iran just like us who are getting killed, who are not allowed to enter stadiums. The diaspora is an extension of the Iranian people at the moment. We strive to be their voice outside of the country while the regime tries so hard to silence them violently inside Iran. What does it take to be an advocate in the diaspora? Why have we seen so much activist burnout in the last 2 years, and how do you specifically combat that when you feel that? What does it take to be an advocate in the Iranian diaspora?
Well, as someone who's had quite a bit of experience as an activist in the diaspora over the last few years, I have to say that our role is absolutely critical. It's absolutely vital. It is the frontline activists in Iran who are the ones facing real bullets. They are risking their lives to be able to just take a few photographs and pass it online. And we have to take that baton. It's like a relay, and we have to push forward, and we have to do whatever we can do with what they're able to give us. So our role is absolutely critical. We are the ones who are able to lobby. We are able to take their calls for justice to the highest levels, to the grandest political spheres. We're the ones who can protest. We can get on the media and news and do these interviews without fear of the immediate brutality that they face. And you know, activists, they wear many hats. That's the reality of it. Over the last few years, as an activist myself, I can give you a day in the life. Let's imagine it for a second. You wake up to a flurry of news, you're posting, you're eating breakfast, you're posting while you're eating breakfast, you have to garner and champion for petitions. You got to get on the phone and make phone calls. You know, you're setting up meetings with members of government. You're attending a rally or a protest. You're dispelling myths online from the media. And you just found out about a recent execution of a case that you were following, and it feels like you quite literally got punched in the gut. It feels like your heart was literally ripped out in your chest. But you only have 1 hour to get your talking points together, because you got to go on the news and talk about something that you're still grieving over. And when that's done, you get on a Zoom call, and it's with your fellow activist, and it's like midnight. And you open the Zoom, and this is a real life story for myself, and you open that Zoom call, and you see a mother, and she's rocking her newborn baby to sleep with her headset on and her Excel open, and she's exhausted, probably from working her full-time job earlier that day. And I'll never forget, I quite literally shut off my video for a second, and there was like tears streaming down my face. And this wasn't grief, it was like this sense of pride. This unity, this pride in our community coming together and having each other's backs and rolling up our sleeves and doing whatever's possible and whatever we can possibly do. You know, it's those moments where, again, another true story, it's New Year's Eve, and I'm working on prisoner databases, and I'm trying to get some members of government to sponsor. And right at midnight, when the clock strikes 12, I get a FaceTime, and it's a member of parliament who's like, "We're on board. We're going to do this." So yeah, is there activist burnout? Absolutely. Is there sometimes too much work and not enough hands? Yes. Is there enough funding? No. Were we all as lucky as, me, who created the circumstances to spend these few years strictly volunteering? Not everyone is able to quit their full-time jobs and do that. That's why we see a lot of people drop out in that sense. But, it reminds me of, they recently did an interview with this NBA player from the Bucks, and they asked him a question. They said, do you see this NBA season as a failure? And his answer was really important. He said, Michael Jordan played for 15 years, and he won 6 championships. Were the other 9 years considered a failure? No, there's steps to success. And yes, we don't have it all together, but the things that we're doing even in this room, once we get that united front, when we get our fundraising together, we get all hands on deck, I think what we can create is beyond our wildest imaginations.
Gazelle, speaking of the role of the diaspora and the West, what's the role of the Western world in the media and covering our revolution? And why has there been so much back and forth on disinformation and information regarding our movement?
That's a very, very important question, Mina. I think before the Women, Life, Freedom Revolution and before October 7th, a lot of people were wondering, why is the media not reporting? Either not reporting, or when they're reporting, it's lies, it's propaganda of the regime, what's going on. I saw it very, very clearly on the day my dad was kidnapped. And most people here in the room know, he's been an activist for so long. They all know each other for decades and decades that they've been there. So the news that came up when an activist was kidnapped in a different country, taken through state borders into Iran and held hostage, the news that was all over the world was terrorist ringleader arrested in Iran. And it was like on every major channel, on everywhere, terrorist ringleader, we're talking about an activist, arrested in Iran, excuse me, he was kidnapped, and we had to show like our proof of our Google tracker, where he was taken, everything. The moment we brought that up to the media that was reporting that, there was no corrections, they dropped the story, it was gone. So that's when you feel it on your own body, on your own family, like this, that's the moment that you understand this is not a mistake. This is not like, oops, they didn't understand this. This is deliberate propaganda of the Islamic regime. But your question was why? Why are they doing that? And every time we ask why, we're going closer to the resolution of what we can change. The why, and I think many other panelists before have described that, is the money. The media and the corporations that control the media, there are money cartels behind them. They make decisions based on money of billions and trillions of dollars. And once we understand that, we stop trying to correct them or like do anything that we're trying to do right now. We understand this is money. We had it in 1979 when this coup happened that they call a revolution. Media has the opportunity to zoom in on whatever they want and ignore the rest. So when you zoom in on a group of like protesters, you make the government of Iran look weak, and then you can build on that, and then you can say, oh, they're too weak to contain the communist threat that was going on at that time, so he must go. And this is the domino effect that you have going on, which is deliberate from the money cartels, from the people who are making deals with the Islamic regime, and then portrayed into the media. And that is our biggest problem that we have. But once we understand that, there's also good news. And we just had a panel about that, the economy panel here on Nufti, the prosperity project that the Crown Prince was also talking about. There is money to be made inside of Iran. That's the good news, because the money cartels and the investors, the brokers of all of these deals that are influencing our media and our academia, they're not political. They don't care if Adolf Hitler is leading this, or if it's like Mother Teresa, or what kind of democracy, or if it's they don't care. They want to make their billions and trillions of dollars. So when you can show them that this regime is not stable, people in business are interested in stability. And when you show them then that this alternative that we have is very, very stable, they will shift course. And once they shift course, the media shifts course, everything falls like a domino effect, like it has done in 1979. That is the key to understanding why we put so much emphasis on what Parmida was just saying, the unity between the diaspora. It's not because we're so hippie and we all love each other. Like most of us, we hate each other. We have a lot of self-hate, you know? When we get up, we're like, that person again. No, I'm just kidding. I love most of the people that I'm working with. They're fantastic people. We don't agree with each other on everything, but there is a lot of love because we know what we're doing it for. We know what every person is going through. The point is, we don't have to love each other. We don't have to agree with each other. We have to show the money cartels that investing right now into the Islamic regime terrorists that we can be a strong alternative. That is only possible when we show a united front. And the Islamic regime was very smart because they did that in 1979. They aligned the unholy alliances of like left and we have to understand that. So everybody who thinks unity is just because we all love each other, it is not. It is a war strategy, is a strategic way of influencing the money cartels, showing them this is a stable way of moving forward, and that's why we're doing that.
Marjan, I want to build off this disinformation campaign in the media. What do you think that this has done to women life freedom as a whole? What kind of effect has it had on our movement in the last 2 years, and what is the importance of combating that?
So I just want to pull the lens back a little bit and analyze why the media has been so difficult, has it been an obstacle to the process of assisting the advocates and telling the stories of people who have been suffering. And I think that there are three major reasons for why the media has not been an asset, but it had rather been an obstacle to the problem, to the solution. And number one is, goes back to the whole fallacy of myth of a reform movement and a democratic system in Iran, where things can actually be discussed in an open forum, and rules can be changed and new laws can be implemented, and there is gradual and incremental ways to improve the lives of Iranian people, so we don't have to worry about it. And if we have to worry, if there are, number two, if there are any problems in Iran, we have caused it, beginning with Mossadegh. We in America are the number one reason why the Iranian society is in the situation that is in right now. And if we get involved, it will get worse. So the best thing we can do is number three. The best thing we can do is to engage in a diplomatic relationship with Iran, remove the sanctions so that the poverty problem in Iran will be eliminated. And if we do all of these things, then we can be absolved of our original sin of the so-called Mossadegh coup, and B, we will be nice Americans and we will have nice relationship with Iran and promote peace and stability in the region. So these have been the three principles of the media that has dominated the coverage of Iran for as long as I can remember. And so it really took the sacrifice of so many innocent people, the blinding of the eyes of so many innocent protesters, that finally, they decided to take off their own blinders and see a different and alternative situation. So we had a great period of true stories being told about Iran and about the movement and the continuation of this. But what I'm seeing right now is a reversal and a back to the past echo chamber narratives being represented again, beginning with the UN General Assembly and the media tour of Zarif and Pezeshkian, evidenced by the fact that when Zarif and Pezeshkian had their meeting, the press conference, so-called press conference, with reporters outside of the UN, guess who was not allowed to participate in those press conferences? Who wants to guess who was not allowed to participate in the press conference? Diaspora outlets. Persian language diaspora outlets were intentionally kept out of the conversation so that the 20-year-old media journalist, who is making $20,000, who is a newcomer to the face of journalism, could, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, could talk about peace, about message of brotherhood, message of disarmament and environmental improvement to the American people and English language audiences. Because they did not want the savvy Iranian reporters who have lived, many of them in Iranian prisons, in order to finally find a voice in a free country in America, in the diaspora outlets. They kept them out because they were afraid of their searing, difficult questions. So what can the media do right now? What can we do? What is the best way for us to use the media? Number one is to become a part of it. Yes, a lot of fringe media outlets, some of them with more questionable types of journalism, have emerged in the last few years. I think we need to polish them up. We need to make them a little bit more professional. We need to amplify their voices, not dwell in conspiracy theories. There are so many true, amazing, incredible, important stories that need to be told that we don't need to really dwell in conspiracy theories to tell the stories of Iranian people. Stick to the truth and really work with the fringe or alternative media. I'm not going to call them fringe. Alternative media that is available to us, including Kayhan, including Voice of America. I see representatives from different places, and I know Iran International was here today as well. So we need to work with them and also make sure that the English language content in those places are thriving. Let me differentiate. We have diaspora media and we have alternative English language media. We need to support both of them. Second, we need to give a voice to the Iranian activists and advocates, no matter how much experience they have, no matter when they entered the advocacy space. We need to support each other. We need to love each other more. I see this level of competition. Every time somebody new comes to the surface, we want to compete with them. Who's better, who's not? No, let's focus on camaraderie. Less competition, more camaraderie. Let's all follow each other. Let's all follow each other. My Twitter has been dead for the past few months. I don't know what's going on with it. Maybe because I call it Twitter. I don't know. And just acknowledge that it's okay to share this space. You know, there's a lot of burden. There's a lot of emotional burden in this work. And it's okay to hold each other's hands and pass it on and share the burden and share the microphone and the stage with one another. Oh, one last thing, sorry. The most important thing I wanted to say is we need young people to take jobs as journalists and enter the so-called mainstream journalism fields as well. It's not enough that we're working with the diaspora and the alternative media. We need people to work with the mainstream publications. Otherwise, our stories are not going to get told. Please, please. If there is a way to create scholarships for young people to become journalists, let's create that. If there are internships, let's figure it out. We need young people to enter the mainstream media.
I do want to flip the coin and talk about how we use media to our advantage during times like Women, Life, Freedom. Parmida, how have activists both in the diaspora and inside of Iran used different avenues like social media, poetry, art, film, music, so on, to change narratives, to bring attention to the revolution, to defy this disinformation? How impactful has this been, and why do you think the regime cracks down so brutally, specifically on artists?
That is a great question, actually. And I am in this space of music, and I always will say that art and music, from the beginning of time, have always been the lifeblood of movements. And this is why regimes fear them so much. It's something that's very difficult to neutralize. How can you stop someone from humming a song while washing the dishes? You know, I've seen such an outpouring just based on the spoken word pieces that I had released at the time. And, you know, just the solidarity. And, you know, Nina Simone always said that it's an artist's duty to reflect the times. And I like to think of art and music and film as the spoonful of sugar that helps the medicine go down. Like Mary Poppins says, it's a way to gift wrap some of the most charged, complex ideas in a way that's so sweet. And it meets people at the most visceral and emotional level that they're at. It's a way to distill anger, grief, solidarity, hope, change, and birth something that can go viral overnight, just like we saw Shervin's Barez song that won a Grammy and amassed, what was it, over 40 million views in 48 hours. And that was also with the power of digital media, because now that we have that to our advantage, things can catch like wildfire. And so regimes have cracked down, and they do crack down on our artists, our filmmakers. I mean, everyone has heard the case of Tumaj Salehi. It's just absolutely brutal, the brutality, the torture, the kidnapping, the death sentences. Salman Yassin, even Shervin getting a death sentence, even though, you know, those were overturned. And so many nameless filmmakers, artists sitting in Iran's prisons right now, some of the greatest minds. And just the fact that they're there is a great indication of how powerful they are. So how powerful art is, and how powerful music is, how we need to use that much more to our advantage. Because guess what? Art, music, these things, they surpass all class levels. You don't need a college degree to feel a song. You don't need to be in the highest level of society. You know, that's something that we can share. And for example, when I released my latest poem, someone had messaged me and said, you know, you and I, Parmida, we don't share the same political ideologies, but when I listened to that song, I forgot about all of that. And that's what's important, where I have people messaging me saying, you know, that line you wrote about, and give back the tears my father cried when he left Iran that day, made me cry as a grown man who is usually quite stoic as a person. It's the love that's sent from Sweden, Germany, Italy, all over the world. It's about taking, it's a way to take these messages to an international sphere. And it's a threat that regimes find very difficult to neutralize because it can't be contained.
We're running out of time, but I want to end this panel on a positive note. I feel like that's very important because as tough as this battle has been, I think we can all agree that the sense of pride that this revolution has given us, this like profound moment of love of country, love of Iran, is something to be just so, so proud of. And they're just, I don't even know. But how's the rest of the world supported this movement? What are some wins that the Women, Life, Freedom movement has seen over the last 2 years? This is an open question for any of you, all of you.
Who wants to start? I got a whole list of wins. Okay, I'll go for it since we're here. Where do we begin? Okay. Amazing seeing these global hashtags, hashtag women, life, freedom, you know, hashtag free Iran, just take over the internet. Like, I think that's a big win. You know, I have friends or colleagues who didn't even know where Iran was up on a map up until a couple years ago. I think just that re-education and that awareness is a huge piece. What about the athlete protests? Those are incredible. What about, you know, I know we all have our thoughts about the UN, but still, you know, the fact-finding mission, kicking Iran out of the UN Commission on the Status of Women. In Canada, I'm a proud Canadian, it was listing the IRGC just a few months ago, and I think that was a big win because it really sets a precedence for other G7 countries to follow suit. What about Iran in pulp culture? The musicians, the Grammys, on you know, red carpets across the world. But I would say that one of the biggest wins in my mind is, it reminds me of the poem from the 70s, "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised." And the point of that was that the real revolution happens, it's that change in the mind. The real revolution is happening within us. It may not always look like 50,000 people's out on the street, but what it is that moment where a woman in Iran used to, you know, grab out for her keys and her hijab, and now she's only grabbing out for her keys. It's that cleric's daughter who stands up to her father. It's those small incremental changes, and I just actually wanted to finish off with a really quick quote, because this comes out from someone from Iran, and it's her name was published. It's Mashid from Isfahan. She says, "We may think the Women, Life, Freedom movement was suppressed before achieving a certain outcome, but a great revolution and transformation occurred in Iranian women and girls, and that was learning to fight against our fears. After the movement, I removed a thick layer of fear from myself. I learned to face my fears. The movement taught me that as a woman, I have much more important role than what society and the government have imposed on me. Around me, I see many people who in the last 2 years have had a positive change in their views on many issues, especially women's rights. Feminism grew even inside of men."
I think we're almost out of time, so I try to say it very shortly. I think what we have seen in the last 2 years is this unity that we're talking about, how effective it is. For 45 years, we've been divided by the regime on purpose because they know when we're coming together, we are stronger than the regime and they will go down. So this is why they're investing $150 thousands cyber army trolls to go out there and push us against each other, and all of these other techniques and money they're investing in the diaspora wars that they want us to have. But we're smarter than that, and we look through it. And what we have seen, though, since the Women, Life, Freedom Revolution is when we're working together, what can happen? Parmida just said, like, Canada finally put the IRGC on the terrorist list. We made a law in America. We have the Mahsa law. Okay, they haven't enacted it, but like we didn't do that before. We have the fact-finding mission. Again, we had the first time that the UN even paid attention to what's going on in the regime. We have influence on the media, how we're changing them from saying Iran before and not distinguishing in, to Iran now, and now we're telling them it's not Iran, we are Iran, these are the Islamic regime occupiers. It's going there because we're all pulling on the same string and we're going all in the same directions. Two places where even Georgetown, where for the first time after 45 years, the entire diaspora came together. And I know people think this was a failure and this was bad and we should not talk about it. That was the moment the regime was trembling. And you could feel it until here, because we saw all of the diaspora and propaganda and everything that went on after that, including October 7th that went on after that, because they were terrified by this thing. And that's where education comes in. We have our platforms on Educate America, and we have a podcast, War and Freedom podcast, where we go into history and we look at what has worked before and what hasn't worked before. And we looked, for example, at the French resistance after the Nazi regime. There was a decentralized movement of all of the people inside of the country. There was a decentralized movement of all of the fractions of the diaspora outside. And there was a centralized force of General de Gaulle, who brought together the diaspora, all of the fractions that hated each other, to form a government in exile. And that was possible to go in and then liberate France. How long did it take him? How many meetings? It took him from 1941 to 43 to do that. That is 3 years of all of these Georgetowns coming together, and doing that. So this was the first step. It was not a failure. It was a success, the first step into the right direction of building that. Plus, and this is my last point, we don't have to sit aside and look at the biggest leaders and wait for them to do something. We're also doing initiatives where NGOs, where activists are connected. We're building a network of NGOs from Europe to Australia to Canada to here, to support the leadership, to support the biggest voices. We, as grassroots, can come together, form our connections, and then every time we want to do something, change the policies on hostage-taking, change the sanctions, change laws, we can use these networks and put political pressure into each and every one of these countries that need to change.
I'm just going to add, even though I want to share a very positive note, I'm just going to use a cautionary piece of advice here for us. And maybe that should inspire us. In my prediction, our work is just about to get started. I think our work is about to get started at a different level. It could be harder, but it could also be a lot more promising. In the past 2 years, we have engaged a lot of new audiences who are interested in learning more about Iran and about the Iranian movement. And we need to make sure that we keep in touch with those contacts, that we keep those individuals engaged in the conversation before the new emerging NIACs and the emerging Islamic Republics lobby don't get to them. They are a captive audience. And if we are not holding on to them, others will go and get them. They will be up for grabs, and you know that they may not have all the information that they need to have in order to make the right decisions and in order to stand in the right side. They will believe that just fighting for removal of sanctions is the best way to advocate for the Iranian people. And they will fight for it, and they will go on a train to Washington, D.C. to lobby for that, if we do not go after them, if we do not get them. So let's work on them. That's number one. Number two, we need to be careful with the fact that the Iranian regime was so threatened by this movement, so upset about the young people's energy and the rebellion against the regime, that on the start of the school year, they go and say, we need to implement more prayer. We need to integrate more prayer into our educational system so that the kids could ask God to give them what the government is not going to give them. By a way to just tame them and keep them quiet and make them shut up to prevent another rebellion. This means that the job of networks and information provision, the satellite, whatever we can send to Iran to provide information, to keep the mines open, to counter the regime's propaganda and the closure of the mines will be countered. This is essential because without a next generation that is guided by that light of freedom, there is no more movement. So we need to make sure that they are going to continue to feel the fire and to continue to movement. And then lastly, I think we need to engage the government. It doesn't matter if the Republican government gets elected, if it's a democratic system. They can all make mistakes. Don't get me wrong. Don't be so hopeful that one side is going to be better than the other. No, or one side is going to be worse. Both sides could make mistakes unless we are engaged, unless we are talking to the representatives on bipartisan level. This is not about Democrats and Republicans. This is about America's safety down the line and the lives of millions of people in the region. So let's keep with the fight. We will win. Yes, I am optimistic about that, but we have to work at it. It's not going to come easy.